Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here with another guest, and who might that be? Peter James Paul Lonton. He is Mighty Pete. And Mighty Pete is going to tell us his message and talk to us and tell us why that Mighty came into his name and about him. He is he has a show, all right? He's a best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, a podcast host, a mentor, and entrepreneur, a property investor, a husband and father of 3 beautiful girls. And I like that last one. My father also was the father of 3 beautiful girls. And I don't know what he thought about that, but it was a job. It was a real handful for him. All of our boyfriends trying to get in the door. It was terrible. And so the interesting part about Peter is that his background is in project management and property, but something happened in his life that changed it. We could call it a spiritual crisis. Many call it an existential crisis that has completely turned around his life and who he is, how he thinks, his perspective. So I'm going to just give him the floor. What do you say, Peter? Welcome to Multiple Voices.
Well, listen, first of all, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So thank you, first of all. Yeah, I mean, listen, thank you for the introduction. It's true. I mean, I came to a point in my life, and I call it a midlife opportunity because the opposite is a crisis, right? So it was a midlife opportunity. At the time, it was hard.
But you're so young. It couldn't have been midlife. You know, we at least go to 100. Come on. Let's change that.
Well, it depends, right? You know, because I mean, I think we can have a crisis at any point in our lives. There's no doubt about it. And to me, the definition of a crisis is when there's a gap, there's an incongruency between who you are and who you truly are. Okay. Yeah. And also potentially sometimes who you could be. So when you get that gap, I think you lose identity, or you get a sort of almost a mini trauma in the body. You get a sort of a resistance in the body that says, I am out of sorts.
Okay,
you know, I'm out of where I should be.
I want to get this straight. So when you say who we are and who we could be, many people talk about masks. I go to work, I do my project management, and I have to wear a mask. And then when I get home to these 3 beautiful girls, I have another mask. Is it something like that, or is it completely one, Pete to Pete?
It's so I think it's more than that. So I would call them roles. So the roles, as you say, I'm a father.
Yes.
You know, people say, "Who are you?" And we recite our roles, right?
Right.
I'm a father, I'm a mentor, I'm an investor. You know, this is externally what you serve as. You know, the place is what you do and what's going on. However, who you are is the question. You know, who am I? And that's the biggest question of all. So at that point, when I talk about that gap, it's saying is I didn't recognize myself.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't know what I wanted.
Was it a depression, an out-and-out depression? You didn't see yourself in the mirror. Was it getting to that point?
It was. Well, I openly say I've had depression twice in my life. And it was a mixture of the tail end of depression. I also had a lot going on in my life. Yeah. And, you know, between losing a business and I lost both my parents and, you know, there was a lot going on. But actually, it was at a point in my life when I was supposed to have everything together.
Oh,
you know,
who said that? Where is that? Well, where is that written?
Well, that's the thing, right?
You've been reading the wrong books, my boy.
Well, you know, and it happens to all of us. I think we play this role, and it's through school and what our parents expect and what our neighbors expect and all these other people expect. And I do think you get to the point in life when you're too exhausted to carry the role any longer.
Yeah.
And at that point, you just go, I just want to be me. I'm tired of being something else. I'm tired of, you know, it doesn't come naturally. What I was doing was not inspiring me. It was not filling me with energy. It was draining me.
Yeah.
And that's the point. So every step forward was like, you know, taking sort of several steps or several years off my soul, you know, because it was just the, you know, totally out of congruency. And I think a lot of people will recognize that when it just becomes, the juice is not worth the squeeze.
Yeah.
You're just saying
Yeah.
it's not inspiring me anymore. And it did sort of take that extreme, losing a business and having a newborn child and all these things. It took all that coming together for me to slow down long enough to go, my formula is not working. I have tried the ridiculously long hours. I've tried sort of external stimulants, from cigarettes to coffee, and thankfully I didn't go, really.
Yeah.
Alcohol was okay, and
Yeah.
but I tried all those things to try and close the gap between who I was and
Yeah.
who I truly was at that time.
Yeah.
And I think we all do that.
You made me laugh when you were saying the juice is not worth the squeeze. And it
Mm.
really sparked a flame in my head. And in Italy, they say it's not worth the candle. The effort is not worth the candle. So where that expression, I mean, the Vatican's not far from where I live. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's funny. It's cute. So now you're in the throes of this with one child at the time?
With one child at that time, yeah. And like I say, I was at a point in my life, and I think this is quite a common thing.
Yeah.
When people get to an age, they realize that, they're sort of weighed down by the effort of being who they have always told they were supposed to be, or,
Yeah, the
they're people pleasing
expectations.
or expectations, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And that baggage comes at a price. And I think you get to an age, especially maybe it's with kids or maybe it's with age, or a certain point when you say, I can no longer carry that. That's too heavy to carry.
Well, you were an orphan
Um,
all of a sudden. You became an orphan and a dad, and we're at probably you always look, and this is common, for mentors. You want someone older than you that can teach you something. Then all of a sudden, there you are, and you become the teacher, and you're thinking, oh, I hope I know what I'm doing. It's interesting.
it's
But
gone, right?
what did you do then?
Well, like I say, I realized I couldn't work any harder. I couldn't be any more in many
Yeah.
ways. But yet I was meeting people who had achieved 100
Ah.
times more, 1,000 times more.
Oh.
And at which point, because the ego says, listen, I know best, and that's it. But when you get to the point of saying, I want to achieve a lot more,
Right.
and I know I'm capable of a lot more,
Yeah.
but yet my results don't match my ambitions and my potential.
Yeah.
And it's at that point when, it's almost a point of realization where you have to put your hands up and saying, maybe I'm not doing this right. Maybe I've got something wrong. Maybe I need to look outside of myself.
Yeah.
Because it's not a case of going, yes, you just need to do an extra 2 hours a day, or, you need to put your back into a bit more, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It was at that point I says, I need to really look at my formula completely.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more or less at that time when, I was sort of walking the roads here, because this took time. I mean, this was 18 months
Sure.
old.
Sure.
And at that point, then we had beautiful twin girls joined us as well, just to
twin girls.
add.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So just to add to the little, the sort of that sort of,
Listen,
that moment of change.
You're making me think. There were my grandparents, both of them were twins, my grandfather and my grandmother. My husband's grandparents on one side were twins. And I thought they hadn't come out. My sisters hadn't had twins. And here I was, had my first child. It wasn't a twin. And my husband said, look, we have too much on our plate. We can't. I said, okay. But if it happens. And so 1 month later, I became pregnant. 1 month later. And I was so afraid they were going to be twins. No, they weren't. When did you find out that they were twins? At what month?
We found out at the 12-week scan. And I'll never forget. For some reason, similar, there is twins in our family. With our first, we were sort of on tenterhooks expecting, sort of someone to say twins. For some reason, the second one, again, my head wasn't with it. We were just extremely busy. We were buying and building a house, and there was loads going on as usual. And I never even thought about it. It's only when the girl's scanning it says, oh, there's two heads. And of course, I have quite a dry sense of humor, so I just blurted out, "Is there two bodies?" You know. So that's that's how I found out there was twins. It was like there's two heads.
Night?
You know.
What did you do? Try to sleep as long as you could, because that's
my wife. Well, my wife burst into tears. I just sat there with my head in my hands, Joe. So, and then the nurse
You
was
mean happy
joking.
tears or sad tears?
I think it was probably just over. I think it was happy tears, you know, because it is a beautiful experience, you know. But
tears.
But the nurse jokingly, well, not jokingly, but as part of the procedure, says, "I'm just going to check for a third." And I just said, "Please don't."
Oh my God!
I know.
Was she joking?
No, this is part of the procedure, so they have to check for others as well,
right,
you know.
There.
And that's the thing. I was like, "Please stop checking." You know, it's two's enough. Two's. So yes, that's how I found out. So, but do you know what? It just kind of amplified, and I realized that it kind of took me outside of myself, to be honest with you, Claudia. You know, and in that I knew it was no longer about me personally.
There you go.
Now, I was aware it was all about me, but I was also aware that I had a responsibility to others.
Sure.
Now, and it's taken me time, and I really I have trouble when people saying I'm doing this for the kids. I think that's very wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, you've got to do it with you, and the light and the example and the actual, you know, when your cup flows over, that's when you provide and you feel, you know, as opposed to laying down and, you know, being, you know, sacrificing yourself for someone else.
Let's pull this apart, because it's not very clear. There's a lot of metaphors there. But let's say I see the expression, "I'm doing this for your own good," a husband and wife. Well, I'm always thinking of you. Well, I'm, you know, working, and I'm working for you. You know, I get that.
Yeah.
And we know that may be partially true. There's an ego there. We get that. Now, in the case of the children, see if you can explain it with different words, because I'm having trouble seeing where Pete was at that moment.
I've always been of that ilk that, you know, it's like, and I'm not a religious person, but from the Bible is, you know, you're better to teach someone how to fish than to give them the fish.
Yes.
You know, and I'm very much of that. You know, we all have roles and responsibilities in life. We all have potential in life. So for one person to come out and say that I'm better or you are here to serve me, I don't agree with. And that includes kids. You know, don't get me wrong, I love my daughters, you know, with my whole heart. But at the same time, you know, I understand that the one common entity in my life is me.
Yes.
So how I turn up as, you know, because we can all train in a job, okay? So we can train to be, I don't know, a first aider, or we can train in our job to do a certain skill.
Right.
But that doesn't bring a lot of benefit to the other parts of my life. The one common thing in my life is me. So I turn up as a father, I turn up as an investor, I turn up as a mentor, I turn up as an author, I turn up whatever. So the point is, if I can actually improve me as a person, as an individual, then a better person turns up to all those roles.
All right, let me take that. I'm going to jump from that moment, from that point. You had your book out already, or it? Okay.
Book came later.
So we have Pete talking now, who I deduce, right, from what you're saying, has developed into a better, you know, in inverted commas, person. And you're about to write another book. So that better person is better than the first book. Just give us the title of the first book.
So Be Heard to Be Rich, Listen to Your Inner Genius. Be Heard to Be Rich, Listen to Your Inner Genius.
Okay, so now you're on the second book. What would you do as Pete today differently, because you are a different person, in comparison to that first book? What would your second book look like? We're playing here, okay? Okay.
Well, I trust my intuition a lot more. So before, I would have taken moments of genius, moments of insight, moments of intuition, and I would have accepted the intuition, accepted the moment, tried to understand it, and then brought it into my conscious thought.
Right.
Okay. And sort of, it's saying, right, this is the message. Let's go and
Right.
understand this. Now, what I very much do is saying that's a thought that has come to me, or it's an idea, or something that's come. But I will then sit in silence and ask, is there any more, or how this should be interpreted? So I continue the connection, if you like. I continue that sitting there, as opposed to then the ego or the conscious mind then coming in and saying, I know what this is all about. I know how to make this happen.
Yeah.
As soon as they say I know, because for me, knowing is the language of the ego.
Yes.
Thinking is the language of the conscious mind. Feeling is the language of the subconscious mind, and sensing is the language of the soul.
All right. So
And
let's
those
repeat
four.
that. Can we?
Yeah. So for me, like I say, knowing is the language of the ego, because if someone says I know something, that means that I have I have an intention, I have a thought of the way this is, and I'm quite closed because I know, and that's it. I'm thinking means it's coming from, for me, the conscious mind. You think it because you know it, you've heard it before, you've seen it, or so this is premeditation. Your brain is saying, I think this. I think you should change. I think I should do this. I think so. It's almost outside of ourselves, but it's been premeditated again. When we go to feeling, when you ask someone how you are feeling, that's, to me, is the subconscious mind. How do you feel about this? So this bypasses the chimp, or the ego, as I call it. So that's sort of, how do you feel about that? It's good. Now, there's still bias in there. There's still, sort of other things going on. Now, if we want to go further, and this takes a bit of work, but that's saying, what's your sense? What do you sense is going on here? And this is almost looking at an energetic aspect, if you like. So saying overall, it's like, I'm sensing there's something else coming. Okay. I'm sensing that this is leading somewhere, or actually I'm on the wrong path, or there's something else. Now, how do you explain that? I don't really know. Do I know what it feels like? Yes, I do.
Okay.
So I am a big one for language. So anytime I'm talking to, not that I'm a language expert, it's just in the way it's approached. So when someone says to me, I know this, or I think this, I know they're not speaking freely. I know that they're talking from the conscious or the ego. When someone says I feel sad, or I feel there's something going on, okay, I can work with that. Or someone says to me, I get this sense that I'm meant for more. Okay. That I can definitely deal with.
You said, when someone says that, I could work with them. So we're working, right? You're working, and you're working with someone. Typically, would that be a person an individual who comes to you? Would that be a team of employees from a company? Would it be an entrepreneur, single person? What is the typical person you coach or work with?
So so it's either one-to-ones, typically entrepreneurs. It's people who want more, and also I also run masterminds.
What are they? Masterminds?
So a mastermind will be typically up to a group of 12.
So a mastermind coaching program?
Yes.
Okay, so it's more than one.
In there. So typically I'll run, we have a set 12-week program.
Okay.
And that is going through, so we do an assessment of where they are today.
Yeah.
Then we look at, what's going on in their lives. We look at their internal language, so the things they think about themselves.
Literal language,
literally.
Okay?
Yes. Yep. So what people will say...
Excuse me, do you also work on the language they use on their, how they project themselves, their social media website, things like that? Is that something you work with, or...
I'm not a media or marketing person.
Okay.
That's not. I've always believed, and this is the one thing with some coaching programs or others where I believe you have to get the foundations correct. Because if you're going to build, a big presence, a big person, you have to fundamentally make sure that, the actual foundations and that they're in alignment, they're in congruency with who they truly are, what they truly want. You have a lot of people come to me and they say, they have these big goals and they want this financial income, or they want this amount of achievement.
Yeah.
But then the problem is it's not set up correctly. And then you say, well, why do you want this? And you drill down and suddenly it's because I want to be seen, or I want to be liked, or, I want some significance.
Yeah.
And that to me is a false prophet. And the problem is, if that is not checked, then you could quite happily go 5 years down the path, 10 years down the path, chasing after this to only discover that this is not what I wanted.
Yeah.
So you can quite quickly get past all that, and you say to people, what is it you want? And I know for me, I started off and we talked about core values, and I would ask people what their core values are, which to me is very telling. And so I used to say there, that, for me, it would be either my core values there would be honesty, it would be sincerity, it would be, I'm trying to think what else, because it's that long ago, but, all these aspects, but quite often that's your value because that's also your void. Okay. There's a thing called, your voids are your values. So when people say, I want honesty.
When you say your voids, meaning that honesty is a core value because people were not honest with me, or I had difficulty being honest with others. Is that what you mean?
Correct. So it becomes, it's a highlighted issue, or it's a highlighted thing because it's been something that's either been troublesome or missing in your life. So it's very common there that people, a lot of entrepreneurs have come from lack in their childhood and they want absolute excess in their adulthood because they know what it feels like to have nothing. Now, when they achieve it, sometimes you get to the point of saying, well, now that I have everything, you'll hear people sometimes will go broke, will go bust. They'll actually push the company to the point of breaking because they don't recognize having the riches. They recognize the thirst for having the riches or the want for having the riches. So if you then remove the want, they now have lost their identity. So this can be a cycle. Unless you can bypass that and say, well, if your voids are your values, then to me, the next question is, what's your soul values?
That's more difficult to distinguish.
It is. And for me, I came down and I, threw a lot of work in saying, well, for me, it's love, connection, and service. That's what I'm here for. Living is giving. It's that aspect of, I'm here to love and to connect to myself and to others. I'm not, money doesn't mean as much to me. Don't get me wrong. I've done very well in property and there's a lot's gone on, but my desire to help others and what I would have wanted even 5 years ago or 10 years ago is completely different to what I want today. Completely different, and that's kind of also how, for me, Fire in the Belly came about, the show.
Because it was. Before we go to the fire, let me go back a second. So we were back to where you mentioned sensing. We went from thinking and then sensing, and you mentioned how if it's possible for a person to tell you what do you sense, and you mentioned, well, it's not clear how that works, but there's a little intuition there. There's a gut, like your fire. There's something in your gut that tells you to, or tells you that. You talked about the 12-week program, the mastermind. And let's talk just very briefly about the one-to-one. So you have an entrepreneur in front of you. Does that actual question ever come out? What are you sensing in relation to your business? When would that come out?
It'll come out very early with anyone. There's some people are seeking, because what we want and what we need are often two different things. So quite often people will go to a coach because they want to do more. But what they actually need to do is maybe work on themselves, or they need to look at voids in their life. So quite often you have to try and mix the two, because if, you might come in and say, well, I know that you need to work on a congruency, you need to work on a part of you. I can sense there's a real lack here, or the language you're using is off. However, they've come to me for potentially business coaching to grow their business. So you have to be mindful about what they want and what they need. And the one couple of and you talked about senses there. I mean, the one great question you can ask someone is saying, do you think you're capable of more?
In what sense? If someone asks me that, I'm thinking, oh God, we're at middle school. The teachers want more. I go to middle school. The teachers are saying, but they're capable of more. I feel like punching them. So what do you mean? Do you think you are capable of more?
Well, that can mean any part of your life. So it could be in business. It could be as an author. It could be as, as a show host. You know, do you sense there's more to this? You've set off on this path. Can you explain why, or can you explain why you
Okay.
jump out of bed and
All
you
right,
keep
ladies and
going?
gentlemen, Mighty Pete here is making me think of writing about romance novels, paranormal romance, when here I am with nonfiction, knowing that my voice will be heard and I would help so many women while they're commuting to their jobs.
Yeah.
All right, now I get that. I get that message because it is sort of a message. Now, I have to ask you a couple of things because, you know, like I haven't been asking, but I mean, I have to ask you more. So there is Pete is born, Pete grows up, Pete has a crisis, Pete changes, and then Pete goes on and there's helping others, and he's instrumental in creating change for so many people. Now, Pete's here with me, and you have to tell me what's one thing you hate about what you do, or what occurs in what you do that you can't stand.
I actually don't know. There's very little I hate in my life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Is there something or a part of what you do that you're about to change, or that you're thinking that's not working, I'm going to change that?
There's probably I'm naturally a creator. Okay, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not what we call a high
Naturally a
red. So
creator. Mm-hmm.
I am a creator. I'm best in my zone of genius.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I get into a flow state in certain areas. My wife is almost the exact opposite. So she's a
Just
barrister.
oh, I thought you were going to tell me she's a destroyer. I see her with all these weapons.
But she will literally. So if you ask me to read a book, so I'm also diagnosed. If it's a label, but I'm diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia.
Uh huh.
So, but if you ask me to read a book,
Yeah.
it will take me a lifetime. Okay, it doesn't bring me leisure or pleasure. It's not. It just doesn't really do it for
So
me.
you must be
I'm very auditory. I'm very
audio book,
creative.
an audio book
Yes,
listener. There you go.
very.
A man after
So
my own
I'm
heart. Mm-hmm.
very audio, very very much in flow state.
Mm-hmm.
If you hand me a marker, I'll write in the walls. I'll go crazy. I love big mind maps. I go.
Yeah.
My wife can sit and read a book from front to back. She will memorize where it is. She will listen. She will read. She'll do all this, and almost the exact opposite to me. And that's um, so when it comes to the administration side,
Yeah.
the sort of the ongoing side of,
Mm-hmm.
of business, I will say to people, it's like once I'll join them when the business is on fire or something's happened, they need big change. However, when it comes to business as usual, you'll want to get me out of there because I'll start to either change things or wreck things.
Uh
You
huh.
know, I'm not a person for stability or regularity. I like change. That's where I see for me, the contrast comes and the energy comes in that contrast, in that comparison.
Uh huh.
Here's where you could be and here's where you are.
Ah, okay.
Here's the worst thing that can happen. Here's the best thing that can happen. Well, that to me is an energy creation area,
Mm-hmm.
so that produces transformation. But when it comes to just turning up, doing normal things, doing regular things, well, that's when, my ADHD kicks in and I'm gonna cause trouble. So
So
I
the
don't know if it's a
answer.
hate thing, but it's better to get me out of the room when that starts to happen.
So I guess the short answer here would be that you regularly change. You are changing every day. You're changing people, you're changing perspectives, transforming their idea. I get that. Now I get that. That was uh, illuminating. So now
Well, that
what the
hmm.
title of the new book?
So the new book is called The Power of Experience.
Okay, so it's in the works. There's a draft
Mm-hmm.
title, all right? So
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
Power of Experience. Now this is a new direction.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more.
So it is and it isn't. I love sort of specific topics and to explain, I suppose, why I've suddenly. It is ironic coming from a dyslexic. Now I'm only 2 years
Right.
diagnosed as a dyslexic, right? So,
And
and this is
why did you have somebody do that? Were you worried that you couldn't get through reading, or did somebody else push you to do it, like the barrister?
So my niece was diagnosed, so she had some trouble in school, and just it was picked up. So some of the classes she was sort of falling behind on, and so it was picked up with my niece. Now it was a running joke. Myself and my sister are very close. Both her and I, it was like a running joke. It's just we were always like, well, we are dyslexic. We've just never been properly diagnosed.
Right.
When my niece was diagnosed, and it took a while because my sister hadn't been diagnosed, and so it was kind of like the first time. So what I decided very quickly was that actually it'll be, if it was going to occur in one of my three girls, then it would be much easier if I had been properly diagnosed.
Sure.
So then we would know to look out for it. Therefore, if we had to get to the stage of diagnosing for them, then it would just make life easier. So I did it more just as a housekeeping exercise.
Right.
However, it's been absolutely game changing. For
what
me.
What about your sister? Was she convinced to do it as well, to go and have
She hasn't done it herself yet, but she probably will, and it's one of those things, but it is a running joke, it's like, well, if I have it, you definitely have it, so, but what that taught me was, and there's a thing, and I say to anyone, is learn how you learn. Okay.
Yes, but I have to say that if I think about the development of the talk that we're having, by no stretch of the imagination would I have ever thought that you would be diagnosed as suffering from that. And I'll tell you why, because I did have another guest on who, after the show, or during the show, I'm not sure, had mentioned it. And at one point, I asked my question, and sometimes, as you see, my questions are a little convoluted, and it takes me a little while to get them out. At the end of all that question, he said, "Can you repeat the question?" And I thought, holy goodness, now what am I going to do? And so I did repackage it in a smaller form and gave it. And then I realized that was a form. It may be. I don't know. What are your experiences? Because I know that you are guests, and you are guest on other shows, and you speak publicly, and you do have your own podcast, and you have to be functional in that capacity. How does it play out?
So for me, it's very much been a strength.
Good.
So with my own show, I will very much almost put myself into a zone, and I know that I'm here. I will ask, and this is where, to me, separating the ego and the intuition has been huge.
Yeah.
So instead of sitting with a set of questions, I'll literally try and get as close to what I was actually, the question that popped into my head, and then we try and make it more beautiful or pretty or more, whereas I'll just literally ask the question that comes in and saying, well, why did you think that? Or, I'm noticing that the body language is, it's gone off here. Is there something?
Yours or the guests?
Quite often the guests,
Oh, give me an example, because I never look at body language. Maybe I should.
And it could be anything from, somebody looking at you into the camera. It could be their speed of reaction of how they respond to things. It could be their level of enthusiasm. If I'm excited, I suddenly talk more and I go faster, and my voice goes up and all these things.
Yes.
So, and I have had it with some guests. I sense an incongruency. And I had one actually 2 weeks ago. And I couldn't, hand on heart, I couldn't publish the episode.
I know.
It's because
to me as well.
Who they are and who they were trying to say they were was totally different for me.
I know. It happened to me, and I was aided in a sense, because the audio was so bad after the recording that I couldn't use it no matter how much I tried. And so that was that. But it was a chore. It was a real chore. Yeah. I know. So let's say that you're every day. Well, no, I say every day. There's a thing called survival on the one hand, and then there's another thing called, on the other end of the spectrum, living, and they're two different things. And so I was about to say, you survive day in and day out. But no, because you seem to be perfectly capable of getting right into that, into that skin of yours, knowing full well who you are, more or less, because that changes every second. But at the same time, being in a position of extending yourself, because that's what you're doing, because of your core values. We spoke about them. You mentioned how you would be comfortable in doing this type of extension. And so it seems to me that given the question that I just asked before about what would you change, and then you put me on the right track because you showed me very clearly this is change. I am enacting change every moment of the day with other people, and that's probably part of your mission as well. And what I like about, and this is not an evaluation, of course, about you, but what I like about the tone of the conversation is that Mighty Pete, I was so worried, here he is, Mighty Pete, fire in the belly. Oh my God, how am I going to control this guy? And here he is, a soft-spoken individual, and it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. I really do hope we have the chance to communicate again and to have you back on Multiple Voices podcast, on this podcast. I'm so happy that you're willing, and we just touched the surface. We didn't even go into so many things. We were talking about your book, and I don't want you to go any further. Maybe that could be the topic of the next interview. How about that? Would you be willing?
Sounds great. Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
I'd say to anyone just to be a raving amateur in your life.
Yeah.
Don't never take on the title of professional or anything. You're just saying is be the most enthusiastic person in the room. You are an amateur. We're all amateurs, so we're all learning, making mistakes, doing our best, trying hard. So if you can do nothing more than be a raving amateur in your life, believe me, life will change.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. We will talk again, Pete. Thank
you.
Bye-bye.